This episode of the Card Insiders podcast is brought to you by Omnisend. Omnisend is a powerful marketing automation platform specifically built for e-commerce businesses. With easy-to-use visual automation workflows, customer segmentation, 24/7 support, multiple channels including SMS, and built-in integrations with key e-commerce platforms such as Shopify and Shopify Plus, BigCommerce, WooCommerce, and Magento, Omnisend enables marketers to effectively grow their business without costing a fortune. Who says marketing automation has to be expensive? Learn more about how Omnisend can help you maximize your data and grow your sales at omnisend.com. Welcome, everyone, to the Card Insiders podcast. I'm your host, Greg Zakwitz. In Season 1, as you know, we've been speaking with CEOs, founders, and marketing executives about the challenges of growing a business and how they're adapting to the constantly changing D2C landscape. Today's episode will conclude Season 1 of the podcast, but stay tuned. Season 2 is right around the corner for you. Before we get into today's episode, I'd like to kindly ask you to tell your friends and colleagues about the podcast, maybe share something on social about it, and please give us a review and rate us on Apple Podcasts. Also, if you have any questions, comments, or are interested in sharing your email marketing or e-commerce story, we'd love to hear from you, and you can email us at podcast@omnisend.com. Now, let's jump into today's episode. I'd like to welcome to the show the CMO of Gabi Insurance, Nick Fairbairn. Welcome to the show, Nick. Thanks for being here.
Hey, Greg. Thanks for having me.
So, Nick, I appreciate you taking the time to join us. And I mentioned that you are the CMO of Gabi Insurance, but I also want to let the audience know that you're also an advisor of several D2C brands. You were one of the first marketers at Dollar Shave Club. We were talking offline, for lack of a better term, petal flowers, right? Yeah, you like that?
Yep.
Pun intended. You used to sell, flowers online, stuff like that. So we're going to get into that. But I think, when people might say insurance or hear insurance, they're like, it doesn't really apply to me because I sell products. But I think there's a really interesting overlap between how people make purchasing decisions. And I want to, hopefully you can get into some of that with me today.
Oh, yeah, I'd love to. Look, I didn't want to work in insurance either, but it happened and I'm enjoying it and we're growing like crazy. I was able to leverage all of the things that I've kind of learned and put together, from peddling flowers at Pro Flowers to my agency days as a media guy before that, to selling subscriptions to boxes of clothes at a company called La Tote, to selling razors at Dollar Shave Club and subscription membership and kind of upselling. So, there's some kind of similarities, and so there's a toolbox I've got that I think I can share that applies across the board in kind of the D2C world that we can talk about today.
Very good. I was on the phone. Does anyone actually want to work insurance? I'm sure someone's there, but I feel like everyone you talk to is insurance. Like, I never thought I'd be working insurance, and here I am.
I'll tell you, I'm fascinated by it, and I'm actually really, really enjoying it. And it's a hard nut to crack, and it's a busy, cluttered space. And I'm loving it because the mission of what we do at Gabi, we're an insurance marketplace. We focus primarily on P&C right now, which is home and auto. And so for us, we work with about 40 different insurance companies, so carriers. And essentially, we're a marketplace, and you plug in your existing insurance. You bring us your kind of insurance card, or you log in with your current insurance, and we give you an apples to apples comparison. We take 1,200 different attributes and come back and bring you the same exact coverage with alternative carriers. And in a lot of cases, if you've been with your insurance company for a long time, we're able to find you some significant savings. And so the mission for us is make insurance accessible and affordable for all. So how do we just kind of sort of break down the kind of shopping experience and make it easier? I mean, who's ever shopped for car insurance and wanted to jump off a cliff because, you have to call 500 different numbers? So for us, I think it's a nice purchase experience, and we're not disrupting insurance. Like, these insurance companies are how we provide our service, right? So think of like Expedia or Amazon for home and auto insurance. And you didn't even ask me what Gabi does, but I couldn't help myself. That's what we do.
So that was my next question. So you just beat me to it. You saved me from talking a little bit. Let's just jump into it right now. So you have people who are shopping for insurance. Obviously, everyone, you said home and auto. So theoretically, if they're 15, 16, based on where they live, they are a target demo. Who is your ideal customer base from a demographic standpoint?
For me, I mean, look, anyone that lives somewhere or drives a car technically could be in my, sweet spot. But for us, what we do is we help understand all the elements of the existing coverage and where you could be saving money. How long have you been with your existing insurance company and the rates just go up every year and you kind of just look the other way because you don't want to deal with it? So truly somebody that, has a car or two, is married or about to start a family, so multiple cars in the house, one or two homes, typically is where we can find people the most savings. Like I said, we apply to everyone, but typically, 25 or 30 so years old up to about, 55, 60 is our sweet spot.
Very good. And Let's talk about ways you kind of differentiate in the marketplace as well. So like you said, you're working with insurance companies. So you're working with like State Farm, Allstate, whoever it might be.
Right.
But you're also competing against other comparison type sites. So you're going to have competitors as well. What is your approach to creating a differentiation in the marketplace from where you guys sit?
That's a great question. It's tough, right? We also compete with the people that we sell, right? Because the category itself spends so much money on television advertising, right? I mean, you can't watch a sports program without seeing at least a couple insurance carriers, right? So for us, our differentiation really is around putting the customer in the driver's seat. And it's about being unbiased and kind of giving the customer control. So if you've ever worked with an insurance agent or a broker before, like the guy down the street that has a office, then he sells you one specific carrier, but he can also sell you other carriers. Sometimes that model rewards that agent to get you in one specific carrier. We strip that down. And yes, we get paid different commissions from different carriers, but we don't bring that through to the consumer. We literally lead with price. So our key differentiators to other insurance kind of comparison engines are, one, we actually show you real quotes. A lot of those other guys are kind of head fake marketplaces that click you out to the Geicos of the world, in which you have to go through the flow again, right? So it's kind of like not a real marketplace. So we're a real marketplace. Also, you can purchase through us, whereas typically you purchase through the carrier in those what we call lead gen type marketplaces. The other big thing for us is because we ask you to link your existing insurance account, we do a really good job at apples to apples comparison. And so what does that mean? The industry itself has gotten a name for itself on saying, hey, it's only X dollars a month, click here. And then when you go add all the coverage that you really need, it ends up more expensive than what you came from. So we like to say that we try really hard for, full transparency and apples to apples, as well as we have this really, really crazy no data selling, big privacy push. So with us, when you go through our flow, we don't share your information with anyone until you pick the people that you want to work with. Say you want to buy Progressive through us, then we go book you with Progressive and you're a Progressive customer. And then you start getting communications from them as a customer, as well as Gabi as your agent. So another big differentiator there is just no data, no spam. When you ever sign up for these types of things, like if you ever signed up for a home loan, I did. I just bought a house and I went through one of those marketplaces and I'm still getting, 7 emails a day and random phone calls. That is not what we do.
So that's really interesting you say that, because that's immediately what I think of, right? So mortgage, insurance the same way, right? So I think a lot of that consumers have become turned off to it, but they have to go, if they're shopping for insurance, they just have to go through a process where they know it's not enjoyable, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
To me, this really comes down to, for your brand or any other brand, trying to build trust. And physical good retailers have this exact same thing, especially if they're newer, they're startups. How do we build trust in our consumers?
Yep.
What are some of the ways that you guys do build trust? You mentioned not selling information. I've got to believe some people look at that and say, yeah, they'll probably sell pieces of it, but they don't sell some of it. You guys are not selling it or sharing it until there is a certain point where it makes sense to share for the transaction. But how are you guys building trust with consumers who look at different marketplaces now and be like, it's just another run of the mill?
Yeah. I think it's a tough job for me, the marketer, right? So I'm doing a lot of television advertising. So that's a nice place to get kind of, an awareness push out, but it's bought very direct response. So that's a way to get a little bit of trust of like, okay, I know who this brand name is. I'm pushing hard. The people that do buy from us have really, really strong NPS. It's like 85, 87, and the industry is like at a 37. So we're doing something right. And I'm asking these folks to review me. So we have a couple thousand reviews. So that's a little bit of a nice addition there. Because if you look at the industry itself, reviews are pretty poor. So there's a way to position out of that. And then we have licensed agents. So while we are technology and it takes 2 minutes or 3 minutes or whatever to get a quote from us, you still can get on the phone and talk to somebody and talk about your coverage. And we have multiple licensed agents that kind of, advise you through the process. So think of our people not as salespeople, but kind of consultants to talk to you about, well, maybe you should go with this carrier versus the other. It's only $20 more a month, but you're going to get this extra XYZ or whatnot. So I think it's a bunch of different things, as well as kind of making sure we're clear and transparent about the carriers and what you're getting, right? In some cases, people want to see very big national brands. In some cases, people don't care and they're okay with smaller regional ones. And so it's us also being smart about what we surface people when and why.
Very good. And I want to talk to you a little bit about channels and how you're communicating different messaging, because you mentioned TV advertising, you're mentioning being able to, I'm putting words in your mouth, but like tell a story, but like let people know about, hey, we have licensed agents you can talk to if you want to, right? So it's all these different communication. Now, you also worked for D2C brands selling products. So I'm curious about the channel breakdowns. There's probably going to be some differences based on types of channels, but if you think back to like the D2C days, the physical goods versus insurance and services, how does the overlap shake out for you? Are you guys finding that, paid search and email marketing always does well? It doesn't regardless. And then obviously TV maybe does better here.
Sure.
Can you shed a little bit of insight to the consumers about where that overlap kind of sits and where the differences sit?
Yeah, that's a fun question. I never thought of it that way, but it's a relatively straightforward answer. So my career, I sold, like we talked about before, flowers, shoes, furniture, razors. Right now, I'm advising and sitting on board of a brown shoe boot company. I'm helping a men's jewelry brand. I'm also helping a women's intimate type brand. So these are all kind of goods and products and services. Each one of their portfolios looks similar, but different. And when I say portfolio, I mean growth engine, right? All the things that go in. I think for me in the current business I'm in insurance, in the marketplace, what we call kind of fintech space, referral is a harder thing to crack, right? Reviews we're cracking, but getting somebody to say, use my link and sign up and get a quote just doesn't scale like it does in, hey, look at this razor company. It's only $1. Go try it out. That's inherently a little bit more social, and I want to broadcast that. Talking about your personal finances is a little bit more difficult, and the actual referral engine works well, but it's more word of mouth than it is like this proper, use this tracking link when I've got really hardcore DR, UTM type tracking stuff. The other things I've found, at least with this business, is digital marketing is harder to scale than it was in the others, right? At Dollar Shave Club, we were a Facebook machine. And then when I got there, I hired up a team and we expanded into TV. And then we went from 30,000 subscribers to 5 million with 19 channels, but they all added up to little slices of the portfolio. The juggernaut was this television and Facebook ecosystem working together. And that's not too dissimilar from most of these D2C startups that I work with, right? Facebook is such a huge platform. It's the necessary evil. I love those folks, but as a marketer, to have a dependency anywhere over a certain amount is scary and dangerous, and you need safety nets. So some of the things that I'm seeing in the business I'm in today is actually an over dependency on offline media, which is the opposite of what I've experienced, but also is really exciting at a smaller Series B type business, that television is working in the capacity it is because I know how to solve all the other digital channels. It just takes time and the right team and the right measurement and attribution. So, I think podcast, TV, Facebook, affiliate and partnerships, they all make sense for all of these different brands. The thing that changes to me is the percent of new customers or of your advertising spend that falls within these, right? For me, I think about offline, audio and podcast, about 10 to 15% of your spend. TV, 10 to 25% of your spend. And the rest is kind of falls in the middle between the Facebook and the Google and all that kind of stuff. So I think the answer is it really depends. Each one of these businesses that I work with has a slightly different mix. One's fully dependent on Facebook. One has like a really, really strong partner network, which is kind of like affiliate, but on steroids. And I think you got to just figure out what makes sense from a distribution angle, right? Influencers make sense for some. So I think it depends.
If you look at the brands that you're currently working with and advising, and even go back to the ones that you are actually full-time employed with, are there common challenges or common pain points that you are finding between these different brands or companies that you're advising that, you might not be able to share it with the other companies, but you kind of notice a theme here is like they all seem to struggle with XYZ, or they all have questions around XYZ.
Yeah.
Are there any trends you could lay out for the audience that might match that?
Always. Absolutely. Most of the brands that I pick up as an advisor or a board member, or even as a full-time employee, as a marketer, have product market fit, have an initial customer set, have a pretty good product, but don't know how to really message it the right way, don't know how to measure the growth engine the right way, or maybe they're not doing it the right way and they're holding themselves back from growth. So messaging is key, attribution is key, and understanding like the growth engine and where they test, and really how to set up a testing engine. And that really ties back to this attribution stuff, which, if we solved attribution together, we would be billionaires, right? But there is a way I do attribution that I carry with me now 10 years later that still works. And I buy all these, MMA and different tools around multi-touch, but I end up going back to this kind of formula. So I'd say messaging on how do I differentiate and how do I get people The landing page experience is something that's always low-hanging fruit for me on optimizing that based on D2C best practices, right? The FAQ at the bottom, making sure reviews are there, making sure you're very succinct above the fold, et cetera, making sure you're mobile optimized. One thing that a lot of these people aren't doing is just talking to customers and like disarming from customer service to really like, what are the barriers? Why aren't you buying? Right? And you can do that easy with your email list of non-converted. Shoot them an email, give them a survey, give them $20 gift cards to get some of this data, and then customize your messaging or your flow to help bust some of those barriers if you believe you can. So better said is all these businesses that I'm working with, whether it's a technology, whether it's a good and service, whether it's a service or a good, it's fundamentally problem solution truth to me. And it's what made us successful at Dollar Shave Club, right? So what's the problem that you're solving? What's the solution that your brand uniquely solves, and what's the truth? And that's the piece that people don't really play with as much as they could. What's the tension in the category that you can play off to get attention and drive preference to your brand?
Are there any tips or tactics that you kind of, maybe they're not formulas per se, but they are kind of things you look for to say, okay, this is how I identify that specific thing, right? Whether it is knowing your attribution is completely garbage right now and it just needs a complete rework, or it's, hey, we need to find out what our truth is, or we need to find out what our obstacles to conversion are. Are there kind of go-tos that you have to say, if I ask this one question, the answer I get is a pretty good indication about what I should fix or how I should approach a situation? Are there any things like that you take from company to company that seems to always ring true?
Yep. Typically, when I start an engagement, I'll do like a quick funnel audit and I'll actually talk to 10 customers, as well as kind of look at all the advertising and then look at the portfolio and say, what'd you spend the last 3 months and what was your result? And so when I start with that is when I can get really clued into, you're measuring everything on a 7-day view. Your total portfolio of channels added up is 20% higher than your actual sales in Shopify. There's something wrong here. And sometimes just an outside perspective saying there's got to be something wrong with your attribution if your total attribution added up in all of your different channels is more than your total sales on a given month. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Right? Or also just look at like, hey, what are your click-through rates, or what are your conversion rates, right? If you're under 1%, or what's your AOV, or, what's your CAC? Asking some very basic questions and just kind of zoom out and say, well, does that CAC, will that scale? How many channels are you in? Do we have the opportunity to scale this business without dramatically increasing the cost per acquisition? So, I spent some time working in a venture capital firm as an entrepreneur in residence before I took this job. And I spent every Monday in partner meeting when 7 different founders would pitch. And when they would leave, I would sit with these VCs and understand in their brain the things that they look for. And that's sort of something that like helped sharpen the stuff I already knew to go look at these companies and say, look, short-term, long-term, we're customer focused. But let's also understand what needs to be in place to scale if you want to be venture backed and you're not going to be profitable tomorrow, that kind of stuff.
So I'm going to ask you a really unfair question here, Nick. So you mentioned that one of the first things you do is you do this audit where you call 10 customers and you ask them a series of questions. So I'm going to say if someone's listening today, and by the way, I hear this from people who run companies all the time that I'm either friends with or just have general conversations with, is that the successful ones call their customers a fair amount, right? And it just might be a random call, be like, hey, why'd you buy from me? Things like that. Just want to say thank you. Yeah. So, but you get that insight. So I think it is important. If I spin this and ask you the unfair question of, okay, you can only ask a customer that you're trying to inquire about one question. What is the most important thing you need to get out of that call? Like, what's that question going to be?
I think it depends. If it's somebody that bought from you, it's what was the reason that you bought? Or what was the driver that pushed you to purchase with me? And if it's a non-purchaser, is why didn't we get your business and what could we have done different? So I answered that sort of directly, but to 2 different audiences, I gave you one question.
Yeah, very good. I appreciate the insights. Okay, I'm going to ask you another unfair question here. Looking at your history, your experience, you mentioned kind of sitting through these VC pitches and things like this. We talk about customer loyalty, buzzwords, right? It's one of these things like, you've got to build customer loyalty. It's always been hard. It's never been easy. It's not like things have dramatically changed, but they've certainly changed. Do you think it's harder to generate any sort of customer loyalty now compared to, say, 5, 6, 10 years ago? Or do you think it's always been the same, just in a different prism now?
Probably more the latter. I think it was easier then because it was less fragmented than 6 months ago as it relates to like how many Shopify sites have launched in the last 6 years. We could play that game,
Yep.
right? How many subscription services have launched in the last 6 years? We could play that game. To me, like loyalty and points and game and all that stuff is noise. To me is if you have a good brand and you have a great product or set of products and you give the basic frameworks for a relationship, you're good. I mean, I used to go on stage after Dollar Shave and try to talk to pure play e-commerce and say, think like a subscription. And they go, what do you mean? I go, well, how many of you know what the cost per acquisition for your initial user is? Everyone in the room raises their hand. These are all marketers. And I say, how many of you know what it costs to get the second order? Dead silence, crickets. Right? I was like, but how many of you slashed your brand budget and slashed your promo budget and your email budget? Right? Let's understand like the cost to get a second order or a third order versus go reacquiring, right? And I learned this the hard way at proflowers.com. Every holiday, Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, we would spend $100 million. I had a $140 million budget to acquire an order, and I had to be first order profitable, and it had to be a $28 or whatever the heck it was, right? And I said, God, there's got to be something wrong here. We keep calling our customer list the house file, right? This is ludicrous, right? The repurchase rates on those flowers were like 4.2 years purchase cycle, which means you forgot about how crappy the experiences was just long enough to where you came back and purchased again. And we weren't customer focused. And that was why I went to Dollar Shave Club, because I knew that was a customer focused business. And so now, even in all the businesses I work in, there's this core principle of like, leave $1 on the table today for $2 tomorrow. Right? Think about the relationship. And what does that mean? It means make sure it's a delightful experience. Make sure you understand what they want. Make sure you have good, customer data infrastructure and comms infrastructure, et cetera, and so forth. So I probably long-windedly answered that question, but hopefully I got you what you were looking for.
No, that was great. I long-winded everything. So this is, we're in good company here. So that's nice.
Okay, good.
So I want to briefly touch on that because I talk a lot about, first-time customer is not, you always have these terminologies. I always say first-time customer is not a customer, right? It's a purchaser. Customer is someone who keeps coming back to over time. Let's talk about flipping the script from how do we convert a one-time customer into a second-time customer? What has been, in your experience, the best approach to do that in terms of, let's do it in terms of like marketing channels, right? So
Yep.
I'm assuming like I'm going to go back to email because one, I love email, and two, Omnisend sends emails, but it's in my DNA, right? I've been in the market for a long time.
Right.
But, when I was doing consulting with clients, email, you do these post-purchase series, but you make them more personal to the actual purchase experience, not like a prefab message going out.
Right.
We've always found that those customers who receive those personal ones have come back quicker. They've increased their average order value for the most part, right? But you've been able to capture them where really just continuing on batch and blast message,
Yep.
You kind of run the gamut of, they start churning a little bit quicker. Just my experience.
Yep.
What's your experience with flipping the first time to a second time customer?
It's a great question. And I'll take you back to my Pro Flowers versus Dollar Shave Club, right? Pro Flowers, send the email. Open rates were, under 10% after a while because it was just a mass email to everybody to try with a new promo with a new subject line. Then we go to Dollar Shave Club and we start customizing the comms based on what did you order, or what did the people that look like you order, or what did your cart makeup look like? And naturally, what would the next product be to pair with the product? So once I got promoted to be VP marketing after I was running acquisition with the team there, my core focus was how do I grow lifetime value by launching sub-brand shaving products and really get these guys to be aware of them and then get them to kind of purchase and continue. Extensive segmentation on like, who's the whales, who's the middle market that buys some stuff, and then who never buys anything outside of the razor. What I found was exactly what you said. So I coined this term that isn't unique to me, but I use it a lot with customer communication, the value exchange, right? Put yourself in the customer's shoes. I'm an insurance marketplace right now. Do I care if you follow my Instagram? No, because I don't really have a ton of value to give you there. And so for me, when you think about comms and emails, don't send the email if you don't have to. And guess what? Your open rate will look better if it's more personalized and less volume, right? And sometimes volume matters, right? Resend on openers makes a difference, right? That kind of stuff, because it's a moment in time and open rates are open rates and our boxes are so cluttered, which you know very well. But to me, it's first doing a little bit of BI segmentation work and understanding how to segment your folks and knowing kind of what you're trying to do. Also, like being realistic and saying, I'm not going to send everything to everybody because this mass spray all, pray all, A, isn't effective, and B, leaves the customer feeling like you didn't customize for them. I haven't ever seen a survey that a customer doesn't say they want customized comms based on their, demographic, psychographic, and purchase behavior. So for me, let me back up for a second and tell you, it can't always be transactional because then I don't have a relationship with you. And so at Dollar Shave Club, I worked with the editors of what we called Mel Magazine to create DSC original content, right? And that was the bathroom minutes in the box, the content emails, and these awesome, writers. We found a niche in the space around people weren't talking about grooming in an approachable way. It was either college humor, kind of, fart jokes, or Vanity Fair type stuff where GQ is looking down on you if you don't wear these Gucci loafers. And so for us, it was just like really talking about real stuff. And what I'm telling you is I had a content engine that people opted into around grooming. And then I shamelessly plugged my products because I wanted these guys to know I made them. And I also use traditional transactional email as well as storytelling email. I also put things in the box where they were getting their existing stuff to give them points of trial. The hardest part for me with the existing customer when I was at Dollar was we made it so easy for you to set it and forget it that they weren't opening their emails, not because they didn't like us, but after the first 3 months, it was like, yeah, my box comes once a month or every 2 months. So, I think email is tough with open rates and such, but if you segment it the right way and you have kind of an editorial angle that makes sense for you, and it's not always just transactional. And when you go transactional and promotional, again, like I said earlier, just don't send the sale to everyone. Think about who cares about the sale or customize the promo based on these groups of people is kind of how I think about this stuff. And I've been using SMS, but you just got to be careful and make sure they're opted in. And building a preference center was something that was really big because basically I saw a really interesting mix of people wanting email for X stuff and actually people wanting text messages for upsell and when new products were launching, which was pretty refreshing to me. But anyway, what do you think about all that?
No, I think it's a great answer. And I really like the SMS side of things. So obviously we talk about it a lot at Omnisend, but that's the one thing where I'm signed up for a lot of SMS programs from retailers, and some because I want to monitor them and see what they're doing. And some are more useful for me, some are less useful for me, still interesting nonetheless. I have this conversation with customers or just people you meet or talk to all the time about SMS, and people seem to be hesitant, right? It used to be, okay, it was expensive to send SMSs, and now it's no longer expensive to send SMSs. But people are hesitant because they're like, oh, they get too many channels for me, and I'm marketing on Facebook and Instagram and paid search and email marketing. They don't want to bother them. And I always tell people, I'm like, you don't, right? If they're opting into it, they're telling you at that point, yes, this is how you can communicate with me. But it's an own channel, unlike paid search, right? Where you're just kind of bidding on things and trying to maximize your ad spend. So I'm like, one, people are opting into it. So they're going to be more, at least initially, more glued into it. But two, this is just the way the world is. People communicate via text now. So, the millennials were the punchline, and then it went to Gen Z, which is kind of the new punchline, but less so the millennials. But I'm older than a millennial. I text every day. My communication has gone to text. I mean, this is just the way the world is working. This is, to me, if you think about 20 years ago, and people are maybe even more, people are like, oh, e-commerce is only for the young kids, right? Look how that turned out. Right. It's just because that's the way of the world now. So I appreciate what he said about the SMS side and finding these other channels, but it goes to the old adage, communicate with people how they want to be communicated with, right?
Yep. And then that's part of the brand's job to make sure you've built that relationship and it's not just transactional. And sometimes, when you're with a D2C company and getting your engineering team to prioritize the right email integration platform or the right preference center and these things matter and they can unlock massive relationships and scale, but it's up to the marketer to make sure they're positioning it the right way to get it greenlit, right?
Absolutely. So, Nick, before I get you with a couple kind of softy questions here, I have a question about if you look at the e-commerce space in general, or just say anything direct to consumer, it could be services, could be products, whatever it might be. What's the one thing that either worries you or is just something that you've identified and like, man, I want to watch how this thing turns out over the next couple of years and evolves? What's that one thing in e-commerce that you kind of look at?
One thing that keeps me up at night regarding e-commerce?
Or just a trend that you've noticed that you're interested to see how it evolves.
Yeah.
If there's nothing that keeps you up at night, you're like, man, I'm kind of worried about that. Yeah. Trends are cool too.
All sorts of stuff keeps me up at night. I think distribution is probably what everybody would agree to, right? And I think it's like with COVID, all of my standard understanding of seasonality in businesses or when tax checks get cut or when, consumer spending changes is all up in the air. So the number one answer, the thing keeping me up at night is just the shift in media consumption as well as purchase behaviors because of what's going on in the world with the election, with the pandemic, with the Black Lives Matter movement, all this stuff. Everything's upside down and sideways. And so I'm having to be extremely more agile. And I'm lucky that I talk to and touch a bunch of brands because I can bring shared learnings to each other. The biggest thing that I'm kind of thinking about in the distribution angle is paid social. Facebook has been the juggernaut forever and will continue to be. If you think of like when that boycott went down last month, they barely saw a blip to their revenue because it's so fragmented to small business and all of us using it. The thing that I'm trying to figure out is Twitch going to be a thing? Is TikTok going to, be deregulated, or is that the next movement? Or is Facebook going to kind of find a way to win these users back? So I'm thinking about when these users age out of Instagram. I'm 38 years old. I'm not using Facebook like I used to 6 years ago. I'm thinking just about consumer trends and where I'm going to find these people in 5 years' time. I think there's a lot of competing platforms that have not proven the same response prowess that Facebook can deliver to advertisers.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, Twitch is probably a whole topic in itself because I think there's, I don't want to go to rabbit hole here, but there is a huge market for it, obviously. And I would have expected over, say, last 18 months for it just to go absolutely through the roof.
Right.
And I mean, it's still doing well, but it's hasn't gone through the roof like I expected it to. So interesting that you bring up Twitch.
It's so wild. Like earlier when the lockdowns were happening, there was a huge spike in usage and new types of folks using that platform, right? I think music became a big piece rather than just gaming. But I think it's still really, really early and it's still like dominated by gaming. And I think what'll be interesting about that platform is when it opens up outside of gaming, I think the pandemic has forced it a year or two above its plan in a good way. So we'll see. I think it'll be interesting to watch.
Very good. So Nick, I appreciate the insightful comments about the overlap between purchasing decisions based on industry and things like that. I'm going to ask you a little more personal information now. So we talk about digesting information in all sorts of ways. So, I mean, you mentioned different channels today, like podcasts, things like that. So if you look at your own personal outside of work or whatever, but how do you digest information and what are some recent favorite business or just favorite things you've digested lately? So that could be podcasts, could be audiobooks, regular books, newsletters. Where do you turn to for information or business enjoyment?
Yeah. I guess I'm a fragmented user as well. I sometimes say, gosh, I don't read enough books, right? I read about a book a month or so, and I usually kind of follow my famous VCs and CEOs on Twitter for those recommendations. But I do consume quite a bit of news to stay on top of our industry as well as just the general market, right? So I think about my morning routine is log into the Wall Street Journal front page, see what's happening in the world. And then I shift to kind of my CNBC financial markets to see what's happening in the financial world. And, I think as I've matured, those things have become much more interesting for me personally, but I take them back to my day job every day. And I reference quite a bit what I watch or listen to in the morning as it sets the tone for trying to help understand some nuances to the businesses that we're working within. I then subscribe to all of the media post and Adweek, different newsletters on TV, on marketing, on streaming, and kind of understand what's new and what to follow there. And then I'm a Business Insider Prime user, which, is sometimes great and sometimes I don't think is as amazing. So it's kind of a fragmented mix of kind of traditional news, finance news, and then trade and industry stuff that I kind of put all together. And it's a lot of emails that I get every morning, but typically I do my cup of coffee and kind of peruse and go through. And I'll probably click into maybe 5 of the 100 that I skim, if that makes sense.
Yep. Very good. And Nick, if you could have one meal for the rest of your life, which meal are you choosing?
Oh, man. Hands down 100% Mexican food, probably a carne asada burrito with black beans and rice.
Very good. Taco Bell?
Taco Bell is amazing, but that is not what I'm talking about. I live in San Francisco and I'm talking a California, burrito. But yeah, Taco Bell, my go-to there is probably the Dorito tacos. Me and my 2 kids are Dorito taco fans.
Okay. I wasn't ragging on Taco Bell. I don't eat a Taco Bell. I wasn't ragging on them, but it's not what I assumed you were talking about.
No
disrespect to Taco Bell.
I'm not a Taco Bell hater.
Very good. Nick, we'll have info in the episode description, how to contact you, so they can always find you there and navigate there. But let's do it verbally as well. If they want to get a hold of you, Gabi, anything like that, why don't you spell out how people can reach you guys?
Sure. So you can find me at Gabi at just nick@gabi.com, Gabi.com. If you want to save some money on your home and auto insurance, you can go to gabi.com, Gabi.com, and see if you can save today. And then if you want to reach out to me personally, you can try that Gabi email or nick.fairbairn@gmail.com. And that's FAIRBAIRN@gmail.com.
Very good. Nick Fairbairn, everyone, CMO of Gabi, experienced D2C marketer. And Nick, thank you so much for your time and joining me today. Enjoyed the conversation. To everyone listening, thank you for joining us for season 1. Stay tuned for season 2. It is right around the corner, so we won't be gone too long. Again, if you have any questions, comments, or are interested in sharing your email marketing or e-commerce story, please email us at podcast@omnisend.com. Don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. And until next time, have a great day and be kind to one another.